two. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Smarter Campus Podcast, where we are changing education one conversation at a time. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Joe Faith, an assistant professor at Harding University and a doctoral student in artificial intelligence and machine learning at George Washington University. Joe teaches a wide range of courses in AI, Python, R, data analytics, and information systems, bringing real-world industry experience and academic insights into every classroom. Joe, thank you so much for being here. If you could give just a little intro about yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, Zach, thank you so much. You covered a lot of it there. Yeah, so I teach at Harding University and like you said, doctoral student in AI ML at George Washington and been teaching. This is my fifth year. So not too far removed from working in industry, but it's been very fun. Just getting to be a part of at Harding starting this, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but the new AI program and
Yeah.
really getting things kicked off. So yeah, it's great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Excited to be you're here. So obviously very interested in AI. I know you're launching the AI department or the program at Harding University. Can you just tell people how you got into AI?
Yeah, so actually, when you join a university, you'll notice that it's very regimented in how you can progress.
Hmm.
Some universities do tenure, some do not. Depends on, if you're a researcher, a teaching school. But one thing I noticed was when I joined as a professor, working on finishing up my first master's, I noticed that in order to get a promotion, you're really gate kept in terms of time.
Yeah.
And these levels add up. If you want to get to full professor, it can take 5, 6 years at a time just to climb up a level. But I noticed in the handbook, actually, the thing I'll get to how in a second is tied to this. We found out that if to go from an instructor, which is kind of like the entry level, they call them instructors typically at most colleges, to get to an assistant professor, there was a 7 year time period. So you had to have 7 years working at the university. Or if you got a second master's while you were working, they would actually do that in 3 years.
Okay.
So this was a loophole. Like my dean didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it till I actually brought it up. And I was like, okay, I need to do a second master's because I was like, this will compound. This will make
Yeah.
sense for me to have done this later on, especially. And I was looking for master's programs that I could do online, and I actually came upon Eastern University.
Okay.
They're in St. David's, Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh. And I was looking for something a little more on the STEM side.
Okay.
I was like, okay, I want something a little more technical. I had the IS undergrad degree, and I had a master's in information systems, and they actually offered a data science master's.
Okay.
Really cool. And one of the things they offered was they offered these concentration areas. And they had a couple different ones, but the one that really stuck out to me was machine learning. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You hear this stuff all the time. And I went down that pathway and I'm telling you, I absolutely fell in love with it. I was like, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread. I was like, I've got to be involved in this.
Yeah.
And at that point, then it became the after I got the second master's done, they were like, okay, hey, we're getting ready to sponsor some more professors to get their doctorates, things like that. Because they only let so many people go off to do that at a
Yeah.
time because it's a course release thing. And I was actually at a coffee shop in town. There's a coffee shop right by our campus.
Okay.
And I was sitting in there doing my email. Sometimes I like to go there early in the morning and kind of crank out a little bit of work. And I get newsletters. I'm sure you do the same thing.
Yeah.
I signed up for all these. I started signing up for AI newsletters after that master's. And lo and behold, in the ad section, there was an ad for George Washington. And this brand new program, I'm in their second cohort.
Okay.
So it's a brand new program. I saw the ad and kind of on a whim, I talked to my parents about it and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna throw in an application.
Yeah.
It worked, and then I pitched it to my dean. I was like, hey, this is what I want to do. And it's just been, I think, a really exciting time to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And starting that first master's really got me down that rabbit hole.
Okay. So this is your second master's at George Washington right now.
No, so second master's was at Eastern. Now I'm doing my doctorate at George Washington.
Okay. Yeah, doing your doctorate. Okay.
Yeah.
So then how did you like what prompted the idea of starting the AI program at Harding then?
Well, I'm very much a tinkerer. by
Okay.
trade.
Yep.
I like to build things, and and this is probably a negative to me as well as a positive, but I can't leave well enough alone even with my own classes.
Okay.
I love like I redesign classes almost every semester
Okay.
because there's something new that I see, or I'm like, okay, I could have done this differently, so I'm always tweaking on them.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, we're kind of at a really unique inflection point with AI. Wouldn't it be really awesome if we could start our own program? There's not a ton of AI programs out there.
Yeah.
And especially with Harding being a Christian university, my idea was like, why don't we lean into the idea of ethical AI? And could we build a program to train the next generation of ethical AI engineers?
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's going well? What is a struggle on starting that?
Yeah. Well, what's going well? Support from administration has been great.
Okay.
A collaboration. I think it's a very good time to be at Harding, I would say. We have a lot of really talented people on the team right now. And so I think that makes it easier. Negatives, of course, you're trying to get your name out there. No one knows about it really. So you're kind of fighting that battle.
Yeah.
Also, I'm the only guy. If we want to, it's not a department really. It's in the computer science department. But if we want to call it like the AI team, it's just me. So, that's kind of a lot of load too, because like, okay, we're bringing all these new classes in, and it's like, all right, I've got to be the guy to develop and teach all those, and and not to mention my other load that I already have. So it's kind of one of those things where, I'm hoping that we show some good progress here, and we can uh,
Yeah.
negotiate for some extra help.
Yeah. So what have you been doing with your students regarding AI? Because I know you're like very active in teaching students how to use it. Like just give an insight into that.
Yeah, so a lot of my classes are programming based.
Okay.
So a lot of what we do deals with, okay, if it's not like an exam or something, let's utilize AI. Like if we need help with debugging or explaining a concept. And one thing I'm even done is, I realize that the students that are, the age of the students right now and kind of this generation coming up, they're so easily able to adapt to
Okay.
new technology. I feel like it's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Even though the world and technology, it seems like we're just changing all the time. It seems like they can keep pace and update very quickly. And one thing I've noticed with classes is that the AI almost can empower the students.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a safety net there, especially with projects. In the past, you may have a programming project that may be a little too ambitious,
Yeah.
and you kind of have a ceiling, you just can't get through it. And what I've noticed is that, my students can take things further than they could have in the past. And we almost can speed up some learning of maybe topics that, may not be the most important, but are needed to kind of understand the bigger picture. We can use AI to help kind of speed up some of those things. And then we can get to more content.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
been so awesome.
I want to talk about that. So I think that's a thing that professors are really struggling with right now, right? It's like, at what point do you acknowledge that like what I used to need to teach now I don't need to? Because it seems like you're teetering on the line of like, hey, a lot of these things that we started with aren't important. I mean, not important. I don't want
Right.
to say that. Like, what? How are you pushing students to do more with like acknowledging that those things aren't as necessary?
Right. I think the main thing is, I think it all centers around how you schedule your class time.
Okay.
And so what I've found is that I can introduce a topic, not spend as much time in the past because I might have, for instance, maybe, we might could have them chat with an AI about it or have like a tutor session with it where it's like, okay, I'm going to introduce a topic. Or even what I've done in the past is I'll make supplemental materials, which you then could integrate in if you had a system for using like a knowledge bank, but saying, hey, I'm going to have some write ups about this that I want you to read outside of class. And I think the value proposition is you say, okay, I expect you to do this work outside of class. But when we come to class, we're going to be doing a lot of hands on activities. And so in a lot of my classes now, I'm flipping it more so
Yeah.
to where it's like, okay, I may introduce something. I may give you a little something to read or something to watch. Or like I said before, if you can have a document that you can chat with an AI about, that's also super helpful. But then in class, you're paying money, especially like, if we're talking like programming, you're paying for me to show you how to do things. So why don't we, instead of me just sitting up at the front of the class, lecturing you to death, why don't we roll up our sleeves and let's make something, let's build something.
Yeah.
And I feel like the response has been very positive overall from students in that regard.
So how do you open up the conversation around AI usage? Like, do you show them how you use it or
Yeah, so I'm very open. I feel like, I, the only way to get people on board is to be transparent about how you use it. So I show students all the time, if I'm having a problem, even in class, sometimes you may have a syntax error and you know what? It's maybe just not the best day for you. And you're just like, okay, instead of wasting forever, maybe like 5, 10, 15 minutes of class time of me looking at this. Hey, why don't I show you? Like, look, if you're having an issue, we could ask an AI to help us debug this. And let's
yeah,
walk through interactive. Let's do it together.
yeah,
I think sometimes students, especially freshmen and sophomore, I think especially, don't see their professors as human in some respects.
yeah,
And I feel like this almost humanizes you. Like if you are allow people to see, okay, here's really how it works. Like I don't get this right 100% of the time.
yeah,
You're probably not going to get it right 100% of the time either. So let's walk through how you can use this. This is a tool. Your employers are going to expect you to use this. And if you go do
yeah.
software development, they're probably not going to be happy if you're like, well, I'm not going to use AI and be a lot more efficient. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, let's rip the Band-Aid off and let's just be honest about it.
I think
So
that's great. I want to touch on what you said that like I think freshmen and sophomores like don't think teachers are human, right? Because I totally agree with you. I mean I was just in school and like you see these educators, right, as these super smart people that know everything, and you're kind of scared to talk to them and stuff.
yeah.
And I mean it's the first time I've heard someone say that like using AI humanizes you, which is cool because I think it's what a lot of people are missing, right? I think there's this gap between teachers and students, and when you kind of use that right to like humanize yourself, like I make mistakes but I use this stuff, I bet that like fosters so much learning. Like do you have students that are all of your students interested in AI when they get there, would you say, before they
No,
sign up for your class?
no, you have quite a few that are kind of, like almost like stalwarts. Like I don't really want to, do this, or I want this to. I had one girl tell me one time, like I want this to be 100% my brain power. And I think it's just trying to. And by the end of the class, though, she told me, she goes, I see what the AI hype is all about. I understand now the benefits of it.
Okay.
Uh, and I think it was just for her, I call it like erosion. I just had to keep showing examples of how this could be helpful. And like, not that, I think with any tool, there's a danger.
Yeah.
I think with a calculator, you can run the risk of, well, maybe I don't fully understand the math. But I think to some degree, with any sort of tool, the lower level principles are not quite as important as they used to be. What the tool allows you to do is it allows you to abstract to a higher level of reasoning and critical thinking. And I think that's what we're going to see with AI as well. As a software developer, are we going to be writing as much code ourselves? Absolutely not. But what we are going to need to do is we're going to need to understand, how do these different systems connect? How do we communicate with maybe an agent or some sort of AI and make this work properly? So we're still engineering, but we may not have to be sitting there writing every single line of code ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what you said, erosion, is great, right? So like how do you start that erosion with students?
Yeah, I think the main thing, like you said, I think if you want, you may have had your parents tell you this at some point, but like, do as I say, not as I do. I
Yes.
don't think for getting people to use AI, that's not the way to do it. I think the way to do it is to show and
Yeah.
lead by example. And
Yes.
if your students, it's one thing to tell your students, hey, go use AI. That's a very broad directive.
Yeah.
And it's, if we want them to use AI properly, let's show them how we can use it to help still keep our critical thinking skills. But how can we use it as to quote someone like Ethan Mollick, how could we use it as a co-intelligence, which is,
Yeah.
the good benefit of it.
Yeah. So when you do coding, right, are you teaching more vibe coding or are you still teaching like hard, like are you teaching for loops, dictionaries, that stuff? I'm curious.
No, yeah. So I still teach coding.
Yeah.
And what I like to do is I like to make sure, like through either like a quiz or an exam, that we understand the basic concepts. But once we get off the ground and running, then it's like, okay, let's start using AI to help us.
Yeah.
And especially with like boilerplate code, you know, I don't want to waste my time doing that as much. But if we could use AI to help us with those, and still use our critical thinking, our creativity for creating new expressions in code. I think that's where the real meat and potatoes of software
Yeah.
development and programming is, anyways. So it's kind of like in Visual Studio, for instance, they
Yeah.
have templates that you can use where you can drag a for loop template, you can drag a while loop template into your code. Well, that's kind of abstracting it some, anyways, too. So it's like once we understand what we're doing, there are ways to help make us more efficient.
Yeah.
So
So would you say the quality of work that your students are outputting is dramatically better than it was before?
well, one thing I would say for sure, I think yes, I think the quality is better. What I've noticed though is I feel, and this may not be everywhere. This is, I don't want to paint with a broad brush,
Yeah.
but I feel like students today, as we've really matured with this, 2022 on,
Yeah.
I feel like they're almost hungrier to learn because there's this tool, I feel like there's almost this pressure of, well, you have this tool that can do everything for you, potentially,
Essentially.
and
Yeah.
but then it's like, well, how do I find my own identity in this sea of automation?
Yeah.
And then so you see students taking on, like I see more students now taking on side projects, scheduling time to come with me to show me things they're working on, because I think AI is a democratizing technology.
Yep.
And I think it makes things more accessible. And through that, I think people can express their creativity, if not as much as before, in some ways, probably in more profound ways, in areas they weren't very talented in. They can use AI to help augment this, maybe a skills gap, and then they can use their human ingenuity to craft really cool solutions. So I don't know. I'm definitely in the optimist camp. I get that.
Yeah.
But I think things are on the net going to be way more positive as a result of this. So
Yeah, I mean, and I think saying I'm on the optimist camp is like the good thing, right? I mean, there's two ways you can look at this, really. I mean, you can bury your head in the sand, or you can be like, "Hey, this stuff's pretty cool." I mean, what would you recommend for a teacher, kind of like? Because I think a lot of educators in your position are scared, right? I mean, I think humanities, things like that, they're worried, but they can justify the usage. But like computer science,
mhm.
machine learning, that stuff is a shaky subject right now, and like what you should be teaching. Like, what advice do you have for educators to kind of ground themselves in feeling comfortable in teaching this stuff?
Yeah, the way I approach it is, I know that like I said earlier, we're going to be abstracting. We are going to be getting to higher levels of thinking. And so really the importance is going to rely on, okay, we need to have some foundational skill, but more than anything, I think we need to be teaching critical thinking skills. So not just, okay, let's hammer for loops, da 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 da, but let's think about how can we look at a systems thinking. Like if we're wanting to launch applications, we're going to have to connect different data sources, different pieces of software. How does all that come together? And in some ways, that's not as much the specifics as much
Yep.
as the critical thinking. How do I step through? How do I break a problem down into intermediate steps and things of that nature? So I think that the education will change. And what you'll probably see is, like I said before, we're not going to be writing as much lines of code, but the engineering mindset is going to need to be as
Yeah.
strong as ever.
Yeah.
And so my idea is I really want to teach students. It's kind of like the adage, you give a guy a fish, you feed him for a day,
Yep.
teach him how to fish, he can feed himself for the rest of his life. Let's teach our students how to think, because one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, is that tools come and go very quickly.
Yep.
And if you're tool smart, but concept not so much, that could be a problem. But if you know how to think, if you know how to do reasoning, then as the tools and landscape changes, you can reinvent yourself. And so that would be my call, is to teach your students how to think. I think that's the most important thing you can do, which is really more of a humanities slant
Yeah.
on kind of my field than what you would typically think. So
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think it's very helpful. I would assume for someone listening to this. Hopefully, that's what we're
yeah,
here for.
hopefully that's the goal. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
It's
So
kind of when
what,
you give a lecture, and someone comes up to me and be like, I didn't understand anything you just said. And it's like, well, that was a waste of 50 minutes then. There you go.
I tried. I
I
tried.
tried. That's right.
Okay. So one thing that's unique, right? I mean, I think a lot of teachers are in this position, but like you teach and student. You're a teacher and a student right now.
Yep.
Would you say you use AI as a student the same way that you tell your students to use AI as a teacher?
Yeah, so for my dissertation, I guess I shouldn't talk about the specifics of it, but what I'm
Yeah.
working on is I'm building a system And so it's a lot of programming.
Okay.
And my code base has gotten rather large.
Okay.
And yeah, using AI to help if you are having a debugging problem, especially with what I'm doing, I'm building a lot of custom components. And
Okay.
so sometimes I may have an issue connecting something together, or maybe there's a small syntactical error. That has been so helpful for me.
Yeah.
That has saved my bacon many a time and kept me from probably pulling my hair out a couple times. So no, yeah, I mean the same ways of using it to help with debugging, because once again, we all know if you know how to code, we know about the forgetting semicolons and things like that. But
Yeah.
sometimes you've been staring at something so long, you just don't see it. So it's like, why am I going to waste X number of minutes or hours on something that could be fixed in 30 seconds?
Or like the hundreds of line of code and you indented one too far.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, dude, I really don't want to waste my time on that. So it's made me a lot more efficient. And with doing the teaching and the full-time doctoral student, I don't have as much time as I did before I started that. So it does make it a little more of a balance that I can manage. Um,
Okay.
so it's been
Well,
very
yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of wrapping up on time here. So I got a few questions left.
okay.
But so what advice do you have for a student in computer science right now?
Yeah, what I would say is I think the most important thing you can do is to try to specialize.
Okay.
Instead of just staying super, super, like, because general computer science teaches a lot of theory. I think with the way AI is going, if you could get some skill set in something, let's say maybe doing AI as a specialization or doing robotics, I think something like that could help you stand out. It's no secret the computer science job market is kind of slowing down right now. Similar to 2019, a similar kind of curve is what we're seeing. Now, of course, in 2020, we know what happened, and demand skyrocketed, and it was kind of this just very weird time for a lot of reasons. But but what I think is happening now, in what I've heard from talking to some people in industry, is maybe it's a little too general.
Okay.
And I think the thing that can help you stand out, especially as generative AI, is if you look at things like the KPMG or the McKinsey AI
Yep.
surveys, companies are integrating AI quickly. And so a lot of that affects more entry level roles. And so I think having more of a niche specialization can help you stand out for something like a computer science type job, like a software engineer or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you could, if you wanted to keep going to school, I mean, you could go on and say, well, maybe I want to get like a master's of science and engineering and maybe go get a PhD. But I know not everybody wants to do that right out of school because, you may not get a scholarship and then, it costs money and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, okay, Joe, this is a question I ask everybody.
Okay.
Uh, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about education, what would be changed after your fingers were snapped?
Okay. So I have a little bit of a bee in my bonnet. Some conversations I've been having here lately. I think that one thing that higher education has done very poorly
Okay.
is we have made education a checklist. So you have, your degree plan, most things are pretty regimented.
Yeah.
And what that does though is I think it creates the silos that are classic in academia. And I think we've made learning not fun.
Yeah.
And students go to school to check a box to move on. But I think education can be, in college can be some of the best years of your life and a one opportunity to get to talk and collaborate with people across disciplines. I think we need to think about how do we structure degree plans in the future. And what I would want to do is make it to where we could have more flexible degree options, to where maybe we could have an interdisciplinary class here. Like I would love, an AI plus the humanities. Like, how could we talk about AI in film, AI in literature, AI in maybe biology, I mean, whatever it is. But I think, if we didn't make it so focused on, well, I've got to get this number of hours and I've got to take all these classes, like we're here to learn and let's be a little more fluid about it. I think,
Yeah.
it's the same thing that's happened with math. I think, we see math education declining, like pure mathematics. Why is that? I think because we've made math not cool. You know, you've probably had the stereotypical, really not enthusiastic math teacher
Yeah.
or the math teacher that's beating you over the head with math so much that you don't want to see it ever again.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. We try to regiment things so much that no one can have any flexibility and no one can have any fun.
Yeah.
But I think the best learning happens if you're having fun. And so I think we need to bring the fun back in learning.
Right. That's awesome. That's one
Mhm.
of the better answers, Joe. That's because I mean it would be cool, right? I mean, if so, I
Yeah.
went to a liberal arts school and it was fun. You get to go like I had an engineering degree. I got to go talk with take a Spanish class with a bunch of biology majors
Yeah.
and art with things. But I think I agree with you. It'd be cool if there was like an engineering class that had an engineering film class, engineering history class, where like you
Yeah.
got to come together. Yeah, I like that. So last question, then we're wrapping up here.
Okay.
What is your favorite way to use AI outside of school? So like I use it for cooking. That's my favorite one.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some good example.
Dude, I mean, you follow me on LinkedIn. I love making images, mainly of myself in different forms like claymation, crochet. Right now, I'm redesigning. Actually, the class that I'll be using Boodle on the.
Yeah.
So I'm actually creating a story, and I've actually created. There's going to be 5 different characters that the students will meet throughout their class, and there's a whole theme. I'm going with this detective noir theme, and it's a Python programming class. The main character is called Detective Coyle, and so I have an image generated of him. He's like noir theme. He has a pipe. He's like a humanoid kind of snake. I have Cassandra Bite, who's another snake. I have Deputy Dog. I have Tess Tupleton, who is a turtle. And then I have Professor Loopwell, who is an owl. And there's a story. The detective, he gets framed for a crime he didn't commit. And what I'm doing throughout the whole class is I'm creating these images of like diary pages, interactions between the characters. And I'm trying to create, this first time I've ever done this, an immersive, story driven programming class.
Wow.
I'm pretty excited about it.
I'm 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 excited about it. That's I mean that's
Yeah.
yeah, wow, that's super cool. You're gonna have to we're gonna have to bring Joe back onto the Smarter Campus podcast after the class to see how it goes. But Joe, that's amazing. I'm gonna share on when I post this podcast, I'm gonna show some of the different images of Joe. I think for the cover, I think we might do croquet Joe.
There we go. Let's do it.
That one's my favorite. But Joe, any last remarks before we head off here?
No, I mean it's I think it's a very exciting time. What I would say is to lean into it.
Yep.
I think the best outcomes come when we have a positive attitude and we figure out, let's be problem solvers, not complainers. That's what I found to be the best thing for anything new. And I think this is no different. So
Joe, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Everyone listening, I will put Croquet Joe in the comments and all of the other information about Dr. Faith, but it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.